So now we very happy that we will have a panel discussion, and I would like to invite all the speakers in the morning session to come forward to the stage and to have that panel discussion with us. And we are very happy to have Professor Elizabeth Wilson to help us to chair this panel. Professor Abe, Alice, and Tanaka, and Professor Tanaka, and Mr. Park, please. Now let me briefly introduce Professor Elizabeth Wilson to you. Professor Wilson is with the Energy and Environmental Policy and Law at the Humfield School of Public Affairs at University of Minnesota. Professor Wilson studied how energy systems are changing in the face of new technologies and new society pressures. She has been working on implementation of energy and environmental policies and law in practice. Now, Professor Wilson, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Ma. I'm really excited to be here chairing this panel. We've had such a diversity of perspectives this morning, from thinking about the technological future that Professor Abe presented this morning to a really detailed case study in how this works in practice, and then the social science considerations going forward. What I'd like to do is ask the panel one question, then open it up for the audience as well. And if you could think about questions that both draw out the integration between the talks as well as push us forward to a collective understanding, I would appreciate that. One of the things that struck me in all of your talks is you're engaging with technological systems that really embed very different societal values, whether it's changing our transportation system to be able to work with electric cars, or how the risk of smart meters is being perceived and managed, to thinking about what the role of societal and public opinion is really in energy policy, and then kind of what the future is going to look like. Could you each speak to what you think the major salient issues are going forward in the next 5 to 10 years in your particular topic areas? So we could start this panel helping us all think forward. We'll start with you, Professor Abe.
Yeah, it is very important to prospect the future, but think about 30 years ago when people ask you what the internet will be. Nobody can answer and nobody can imagine. It is so difficult. If you can strictly imagine future of the internet about 30 years ago, you should be treated as a crazy man.
That's why I asked for 5 years. So you'd only be kind of crazy.
Yeah. So, okay, if you say I'm a crazy man, I say that in the future, all the technology of the power system combined with the internet cloud system and maybe 80% of renewables surrounding our society, and local government, local community would survive with renewable income. It's a huge income. Currently, for example, in Japan, lots of amount of money is sending to the mines and oil resources. It's lots of money and losing kind of. But solar, wind is supplying to our country, so we can survive with such energy resources in future.
Really tough question. I think from our center and from the perspective of our field, I think that public opinion and just in general, there are new ways of disrupting current systems at the moment. And the type of disruption that energy is going to be having is probably very dramatic in the near future. And how the public will be engaged is really unknown. From bringing in a different perspective, many people would not know the different ways, the umbrella movement would have on Hong Kong. And so you can't predict this type of what the future would look like, but I could say that social media and the ways that the public is going to be engaged in energy policy is probably going to be very significant. As more ways and mediums the public can engage, I think traditional public utility companies, traditional private companies providing energy will have to really come to grip with how the public is going to have their say in how energy is delivered.
I want to answer in the perspective of business management. Well, in Korea, there are many companies participating in smart grid projects. However, they all try to preoccupy the smart grid market for themselves. Well, actually, they try to collaborate with other companies. However, actually, they did not do that. But now, yes, at least they try to collaborate with each other sincerely in Korea. So I think a successful collaboration between many stakeholders, especially utilities, electric utilities, and ICT companies, those collaboration were very important in successful deployment of smart grid technologies. So the successfulness of smart grid depends on the collaboration between those companies. Well, that would be competitiveness.
It's a good question, but very difficult to answer. I think one of the interface between public and the power industry is the pricing, electric pricing. So basically, renewable energy is free. So balancing demand and the energy produced is the problem. But basically, energy is free. So I hope the pricing will be from we pay how much we consumed, but to the fixed price of the how much we need at the capacity. A fixed type of the pricing will be introduced. But at first, not from the advanced country, but from the developing company, because we have already very much existing power grid, which we have to pay within 20 years. But in developed company, they have few infrastructures, so that should be paid. So I think developed company will be changed the pricing of the electricity.
I think this is a really interesting point and one that I'd like to focus on as we open up the discussion. But you've talked about your projects in Kenya and Tanzania. We've also talked about the challenges of doing something in a place where the existing incumbent interests are so strong. In the U.S., we often talk about the prosumer, the consumer that's also a producer of energy, and how that could change people's role and participation in this. But when you're thinking about the 4 billion people on the planet who don't have access to electricity like we do in more industrialized nations, I think this is a really important point. I'd like to open this up for the conversation a little bit broader.
Thank you. Hi, Peter Hills from the Kaduri Institute at Hong Kong U. Elizabeth, her comments just now sort of got me to thinking about the sustainability element in the title of the conference, which we haven't yet got to very much. And I'd like some comments and observations from the panel about this enormous disconnect that we have right now. On the one hand, much of the discussion this morning is about the micro behavioral, individual household, individual person level. of using information through smart grid metering and other mechanisms to modify behavior. At the other end of the scale, we've not really touched on how the electricity is actually generated. And here is the real crunch issue, because like it or not, an enormous amount of it comes from fossil fuels. And in Paris very soon, there will be another attempt to negotiate a climate change agreement. But when you look at the forces lined up and the enormous stranded asset problem that they could face, the oil companies, the coal companies, etc., it will be a very intriguing period over the next, not 5 years, but next 25 years, as we transition, hopefully, away from this high level of dependency. Now, that's the big picture, but I wonder how the panelists see their own areas of interest fitting into this apparent disconnect, contradiction, almost this state of dissonance between what we know is technically feasible on one hand and the constraints we face at the strategic system level on the other.
Easy question for you.
So, could you briefly reframe the question? I might mistaken to understand your question.
I think it was just this big disconnect between what we promise in sustainability and what we need to deal with global climate change, and then the micro-level solutions that we're talking about here with all of our interventions in the electric power grid.
So, if you think about brand new power grid system, so it's sustainable, not based on the fossil energy or not like energy come from other areas. So if we produce what we have at the site, so that is sustainable. So if you think about the centralized power grid, so it's not sustainable without fossil or nuclear power. But it's sustainable if we think about the microgrid-based power grid. So I hope and I believe that someday we can have the totally sustainable power grid at each site, from each renewable energy. Is that?
Yeah, that is a very difficult question for me. Well, I think, okay, I want to emphasize P2P electricity sharing. Well, in the future, peer-to-peer electricity sharing, person-to-person electricity sharing would be happen in the electricity market. Well, you mentioned about electricity production, and the future of the electricity production, definitely from the individuals, from the microgrid. But that would be coordinated with the entire electrical grid. In that transition, I think, peer-to-peer and person-to-person electricity sharing would be very, very interesting to us. Well, now in the US and Netherlands, right, and UK, well, the pilot test is under development. So I try to research on that project. Well, I'm not. Well, I don't know how the detailed information about that. However, we have to consider and focus on those phenomena.
And Dr. Suo is noticing in all of your scenarios, the carbon emissions went up because instead of relying on nuclear and all of the scenarios you were looking at, you were relying more on fossil fuels. And so that disconnect in these cases was really apparent to me.
That and just to speak broadly, if I may, about, and Professor Hill is just highlighting the really big problem in the projects that not only we do, but the general issue in talking about energy. We've done projects, one project at the EU level with 27 countries, and one of the topics was climate change. And the issues that we face is that you can talk about climate change at a very broad level and say, as the EU, how are you going to combat climate change and energy issues? But those discussions become very different when it gets into the household, and not even that, but individual country or parts of the country, where what you would do in the individual country is so different what you would do at a global level. And so it becomes a big problem because you can't really have an average citizen can make changes on their own, and those changes could potentially altogether have some impact. But at a national scale or multinational scale, at these big talks, because the special interests and stakeholders are so different within each country, that the decisions that are going to be made may not directly be understood by an individual consumer. So at our research center, when we try to engage in these energy projects, we have to, unfortunately, make a bracket and say, this is what we're going to talk about. We can only talk about the individual's abilities or the individual's issues or the issues within a city or a state or a country, and then have some aspiration to say to see what individuals would think their impact would be on a more global scale. But you're right, it's really hard to kind of bring the two together, even though we're trying to make people think about themselves as a global user.
I think the solution is business. Business solution is the best way. Of course, we need to design very good market mechanism. Of course, policy is very important, but the market design is also very important. For example, in Japan, recently we have a deregulation process, and generation is deregulated, and retail market is deregulated, and the transmission is kind of public. Then transmission fee is very expensive. People tend to have a self-generation, in-house generation, because they don't neglect such a expensive transmission fee, including extra high voltage cost. They don't use high voltage. So they use only low voltage. So in-house solar generation, in-house maybe a small fuel cell type or gas engine type of generation. It's a huge market for the small size of generators. They cannot compete before, but now large power station plus transmission fee, they can compete. And maybe policy adjustment is necessary. But once the small generators going to beat the large power station, they can be a kind of a competitive partner in technological standpoint. If they don't have a very stable voltage and frequency, the small engine cannot operate. So they can be a very good partner and compete each other. That is a good mechanism for reducing the electricity price. I think that is a starting point of future.
So Peter, I think one of the other things that gives me hope is the fact that we were wrong in our projections of how renewables would roll out. I mean, in the U.S., in the AEO, the Annual Energy Outlook 2000, we predicted by 2020 we would have 800 megawatts of new wind. We actually have almost 70 gigawatts on the system now, and this has been the story worldwide. And the chart that you put up about the decreasing cost of coal, solar, so only in that we've been wrong in the past and how the energy transition works gives me hope for the large picture in the future. And you see it in Germany, and I'm looking forward to Robin's talk this afternoon on consumption, addressing it from another angle. I'm happy to take another question.
Thank you. Yeah, about customers, consumers actually. In literature, many different roles are envisioned for customers or consumers in the smart grid. Some people talk about prosumers, as you did, or co-managers or customers, energy citizens. The list can go on. So what roles or responsibilities do you see customers or consumers to take up in smart grid governance, if any at all?
I can start here with Dr. Sue.
It's a great question. From a research center perspective, I would really hope that governments and policymakers actually proactively engage consumers. That's probably the only way to actually serve the consumer better, for the consumer to shed light on how they use energy and how the governments and companies should be able to provide energy. So I hope that there is more proactivity on that front. But in order for the government and companies to be proactive, they have to be educated in the fact that having informed consumers actually benefit them. So it's a catch-22.
Well, consumers are, becoming prosumer, and well, in using smart grid technologies, well, consumers are, experiencing a lot of new technologies. During the process, they should, how to say, they will share their experience with each other, and they will participate in energy market, sharing data and sharing experience. The social network main sites try to induce those prosumers in sharing their experience in smart grid market. Well, they can share the benefits, they can share the perceived risks. So I think the most important role of smart grid consumers are sharing their experience with each other.
Before we take Mr. Tanaka and Mr. Abe's comments, let me be a little bit provocative here. There have been analyses that have showed that you can get 80% of the benefits of the smart grid by just focusing on 20% of the customers. If I focus on my large industrial customers who are inevitably potentially more capable of managing their energy resources, the transaction costs are lower, the risks are very different, I can achieve those benefits to my system. Do you think that the current policy of trying to engage everybody and making everybody pay for a $200, $500 meter is really the right policy way to go? Or should we be thinking about targeting critical industrial customers, your 5 to 20 megawatt customers, who could really change the shape of the load and participate in the system in different ways? Please.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I agree with your opinion. So we have to provide options to choose. So if the government provide only one choice, all of customers, for the high-end industry customer to the customers who don't want to use electricity so much. So we have to provide various type of options. I mean, pricing. So so that all customer have to do is choosing right options, right services to use the electricity. So in terms of that, so government have to provide the flexibility of options to choose electricity, what kind of product and what kind of security and what kind of the high quality of energy. So that kind of options can be should be provided to customers to choose, I think.
This is a very difficult question for me. I'm a business-oriented man, so the role of the government is only how to design the market and how to make a tax and maybe subsidy. I don't know how much government make an obligation to the industrial people. It's kind of a planned economy.
But you're doing it now by giving
Yeah, I know.
leaders.
I
You
know.
already are doing it.
I know.
You live in a planned economy, albeit one that we call a market.
So I think I can, or we can do the gradually, but going to market mechanism. Otherwise, always these people are talking about the governmental role and the power generator should be something, but none of our business, because the power company has their own policy and they are making big business talking with the government. It is very difficult. We cannot come into their society. I'm raised up in the power company society for 37 years. So it is very tough for the not knowledgeable people about the electrical constraints, what the electrical constraints, voltage, what's the voltage fluctuation, what's the frequency fluctuation. Nobody really knows about such kind of mechanism. So it is difficult to come into such a society. What we can do is to make a good market mechanism and everybody can join into the market. Actually, I learned from the Electrical Power Research Institute in United States, kind of afraid of new trend that the celeb in staying at the Hollywood people have a huge size of photovoltaic on roof, and they don't pay any electricity tariff because they generate power, and at night time they buy power. Total sum up is zero, so energy zero house. But they are using the transformers and distribution lines, but they don't pay. So such activity is very important.
And these are policy. I mean, I brought this up because the Germans decided that they weren't going to make normal residential consumers buy smart meters, and that it was more efficient to just focus on the big customers. But this concern of equity, of who has the solar and who governs it and who pays for the distribution network, is also in a policy design. And you have a microphone. Please introduce yourself, sir.
Hello, Mehmet Bulut from Mälardalen University in Sweden. I think we talk about, for example, business models and new business cases. I think regulations haven't been able to follow the developments really. For example, just giving an example from Sweden, you cannot have peer-to-peer; it's not allowed. Or you cannot, as an electricity distribution company, you cannot discriminate between customers, that you offer a customer a more attractive tariff to change their habits, for example. So they have pilot projects, but they have special permission to offer these tariffs. So what regulatory barriers do you see in your own country or when you think about your projects? That was my question. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much for that Swedish example, too. So the regulatory barriers, and Professor Abe, we were speaking earlier about the incumbent power in Japan. of the utilities as you went forward. So the question was about regulatory barriers for changing the system or for changing some of the... Maybe we could frame it as regulatory opportunities. Which regulations would you change to be able to allow the systems that you're proposing to go forward? Is that a friendly amendment? Okay.
Yeah, there are lots of things. Regulatory have many small regulations, and it is very difficult to non-knowledgeable people come into such kind of society. As I said before, for example, the voltage in the house, in Japan, it is restricted 150 volt, so we cannot supply 200 or 230 volt. That reduced the market, and people cannot come into. So the most aggressive concept is to buy the distribution network by local government. Distribution network, low voltage distribution network, is occupied by power company or other utility. I'm not sure. It is different country by country, but usually a power company related people occupied. But in Germany, I heard the concession is occurring. Concession is local government purchase together with operating people low voltage network. Then they can allow many small generators coming to and tariffs for new development. So local government has a policy, and the local government has power, and prosumer is the name of the local government. Then local government has hydro resources, solar resources, wind resources, geothermal resources, get money from outside the country. So local government get higher economy. That is one perspective to change the authority.
So I'd like to, if any of you have anything that you'd like to talk about on this topic, I don't want to force you, but we. Okay, and so any regulatory comments from either of you, or we can wrap it up, and I was signaled that lunch is apparently ready. So anyway, I'd like to welcome you all, to thank the speakers for the wonderful presentations and the spirited discussion, and to thank you for your participation in this back and forth as well. Thank you very much.
Thank Professor Wilson for chairing this panel session. And now I would like to thank every one of you once again for all your participation in the morning session. Your participation indeed is very important to us. Now this is an announcement for lunch. Now a buffet lunch is served outside in the lobby, and then we will start with our afternoon session at 2 p.m. So please enjoy your lunch and have a great time with our speakers and other guests.